Katie Brooks ran through the tall grass behind her family's farm, her small hands trailing along the golden wheat stalks. The sun was warm on her face, and she could hear her mother calling from the house that dinner would be ready soon. But Katie was not ready to go inside yet. She loved these peaceful moments in the fields of New Eden, where the air smelled sweet and the sky stretched endlessly above her. Her father Jake had chosen this quiet planet for their family 3 years ago. He said it was far enough from the busy inner worlds where people lived on top of each other in giant cities. Here on New Eden, Katie could run and play without worrying about hover cars or crowded streets. Her mother Maria grew vegetables in their garden, and her father fixed the farming machines that helped feed the small colony. Katie was 8 years old now, and she knew every corner of their farm. She had her favorite spots where she liked to sit and watch the clouds, and secret places where she collected pretty stones and flowers. Today felt different, though. The air seemed to hum with a strange energy that made her skin feel tingly. Stopped running and looked up at the sky. The clouds were moving in odd patterns, swirling and changing colors from white to pale green. Katie had lived on New Eden long enough to know what normal weather looked like, and this was not normal. She felt a little scared, but also curious. The colony's warning system made a soft beeping sound from the speakers placed around the settlement. Katie heard the automated voice say something about solar activity and magnetic fields. The adults always talked about solar flares and how they could affect their equipment. Katie did not understand all the science, but she knew it meant the grown-ups would be checking their computers and communication devices. She decided to head back toward the house, but as she turned around, she saw something that made her freeze. In place, a silver object was dropping down from the clouds, moving silently through the air. It was not like any ship she had ever seen before. The farming vehicles on New Eden were boxy and practical, and the supply ships that visited their colony were long and narrow. This craft was smooth and curved, almost like a giant teardrop made of metal. Katie crouched down in the wheat, her heart beating fast. She knew she should run home, but something kept her watching. The silver ship landed in the field about 50 yards away from her. It made no sound at all, which seemed impossible to Katie. Everything that flew made noise, from the tiny insects to the big cargo ships. A section of the ship's hull opened, and figures began to emerge. Katie's breath caught in her throat. These were not people from her colony or any other human settlement. They were tall and thin, with skin that looked gray and smooth like stone. Their heads were larger than human heads, and their eyes were dark and round. They moved in a strange way, like they were floating just above the ground. Katie counted 5 of the creatures as they spread out from their ship. They carried devices that looked like small boxes with blinking lights. One of them, who seemed to be the leader, pointed toward the colony buildings. Katie could not understand their language, but she could tell they were communicating with each other. The leader creature looked different from the others. It wore something that might have been clothing, a dark material that seemed to shift and move on its own. The other creatures wore nothing that Katie could see, their gray skin appearing to be their only covering. Katie tried to stay very still, but her foot slipped on the soft earth. The sound was small, but the leader creature immediately turned its large dark eyes toward her hiding spot. Katie felt a chill run down her spine, as those eyes seemed to look right through the wheat stalks and find her. The creature moved toward her with that strange floating walk. Katie wanted to run, but her legs felt frozen. The creature stopped just a few feet away from her and made a sound that might have been words, but in a language she had never heard before. It sounded like musical tones mixed with whispers. Katie finally found her voice and whispered, "Please don't hurt me." The creature tilted its large head and made more of those musical sounds. Then it raised one of its hands, and Katie saw that it had long, thin fingers that ended in points. The creature pointed a small device at her, and Katie felt a warm sensation wash over her body. She tried to run then, but her legs would not obey her. The warm feeling was spreading through her whole body, making her feel sleepy and confused. The creature made more sounds, and the others came over to where Katie was standing. One of them picked her up, and Katie was surprised by how strong it was, despite looking so thin. She tried to call out for her parents, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. The creatures were already carrying her toward their ship dot as they moved her closer to the silver craft. Katie could see that it was much larger than she had first thought. The hull was covered in patterns that seemed to move and change when she looked at them. The opening they had come through was perfectly round, and Katie could see a soft light glowing from inside. The creature carrying her made those musical sounds again, and Katie felt herself getting more and more sleepy. She fought to stay awake, thinking about her parents and how worried they would be when she did not come home for dinner. Her mother would call her name from the porch, and her father would come looking for her with his big flashlight. The last thing Katie saw before the sleepy feeling took over completely was the inside of the alien ship. It was nothing like the human ships she had seen. The walls curved and flowed like they were made of liquid metal, and lights moved along them in patterns that made her eyes water to look at. She tried one more time to call for help, but no sound came out. The creatures were talking to each other in their strange musical language, and Katie heard her name somehow mixed in with their words. Though she could not understand how they knew what to call her, the ship began to move, rising silently into the sky. Katie felt herself being placed on something soft, and the last thing she remembered was seeing the fields of New Eden growing smaller and smaller below them, through what might have been a window. Back at the Brooks farm, Maria was setting the table for dinner when she realized Katie had not come in yet. She walked to the back door and called her daughter's name, expecting to see the little girl come running across the fields. Like always, when there was no answer, Maria called louder. Still nothing. She went to find Jake, who was in the barn working on one of the harvesting machines. "Katie's not answering when I call her," Maria said, worry starting to creep into her voice. Jake looked up from his work, oil on his hands and a concerned expression on his face. "She was playing in the back field when I saw her last. Maybe she's found something interesting and lost track of time." They both went outside and called Katie's name together, their voices carrying across the peaceful farmland. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Katie never stayed out this late without being called several times. Jake had his flashlight and started walking toward the fields where Katie liked to play. Maria followed him, calling their daughter's name every few steps. Other families in the colony heard them and came out to help search. It was Jake who found the strange markings in the field. The wheat was pressed down in perfect circles, and the ground underneath was warm to the touch. There were no footprints, human or animal, but there was something else. A faint smell in the air that Jake had never encountered before. Something like ozone mixed with flowers. Standing in that field, looking at the impossible markings and breathing in that strange smell, Jake Brooks felt a cold fear settle in his stomach. His little girl was gone, and something told him that this was not a normal disappearance. High above New Eden, the silver ship moved through space toward its destination, carrying a sleeping human child who had no idea that her abduction would soon change the course of galactic history. The emergency message from New Eden reached Earth Command at 3 a.m. local time. Admiral Susan Price was woken by the urgent beeping of her secure communication device. She read the report twice before she could believe what she was seeing. A human child had been taken by aliens. Admiral Price had served in the Terran Defense Force for 25 years. She had fought pirates settled disputes between colonies, and kept the peace in dozens of star systems. But she had never dealt with anything like this. The report was clear. 8-year-old Katie Brooks had been abducted from her family's farm by unknown alien beings. She immediately called her staff together for an emergency meeting. The war room filled quickly with officers who had been pulled from their beds. Maps of known space appeared on the large screens, and data flowed across computer terminals as they tried to understand what had happened. What do we know about the aliens who took the child? Admiral Price asked. Captain Stevens, her intelligence officer, looked tired but alert. The energy signatures match a species called the Zephyrians. We have limited contact with them. They're known to be scientists and researchers, but they've always avoided direct contact with human settlements. Admiral Price studied the data. On her screen, the Zephyrians were described as highly intelligent but cold in their dealings with other species. They had advanced technology and ships that could travel faster than most human vessels. How long since the abduction? She asked. 16 hours, Admiral. The child's parents found strange markings in their field, and the colony administrator sent the emergency signal immediately. Admiral Price felt anger building inside her. 16 hours was a long time in space. The aliens could be anywhere by now, but she also felt something else, something that surprised her with its intensity. She felt the need to bring Katie Brooks home, no matter what it took. Send orders to all ships in the outer sectors. I want every available vessel converging on New Eden, and get me Captain Morrison on the Vengeance. He's the closest to that system. Meanwhile, on the farming colony of New Eden, Jake Brooks was not waiting for the military to arrive. He stood in his workshop, looking at his old transport ship, the Wanderer. It was a civilian vessel, designed for short trips between nearby planets. But Jake was a good engineer, and he had ideas about how to make it faster. Maria found him there as the sun was rising, surrounded by tools and spare parts. She had not slept all night, and her eyes were red from crying. "What are you doing?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "I'm going after her," Jake said, not looking up from the engine he was working on. "I'm not sitting here while Katie is out there somewhere, scared and alone." Maria watched her husband work. She knew that look on his face. Jake Brooks was the kind of man who fixed things when they were broken. And right now, the most important thing in his world was broken. "I'm coming with you," she said. Jake looked up at her, and for a moment, his strong expression softened. "Maria, this could be dangerous. We don't know what we're dealing with." "She's my daughter, too," Maria said firmly. "And I was a communications specialist before we moved here. You'll need someone who can work the radio and navigation systems while you fly." Jake nodded. He had married a strong woman, and he was grateful for that now. While Jake worked on the ship, Maria used her old military contacts to spread the word about Katie's disappearance. She sent messages on every frequency she could access, telling anyone who would listen that aliens had taken a human child, and that humanity was coming to get her back. Captain Luke Morrison received Admiral Price's orders while his destroyer, the Vengeance, was patrolling the outer edge of human space. He was a veteran officer who had commanded his ship for 5 years. He had seen combat and handled difficult situations, but something about this mission felt different. When he read the details about Katie Brooks, he thought about his own daughter. Back on Earth, she was about the same age as the missing girl. The thought of aliens taking his child made his hands shake with anger. "Set course for New Eden, maximum speed," he ordered his crew. "And send a message to Admiral Price. Tell her the Vengeance is responding, and we'll be there in 4 days." 4 days felt like forever when a child was missing, but it was the best they could do with current technology. Aboard the alien ship Nexus Prime, Katie Brooks was waking up in a strange room. The walls were curved and smooth, glowing with a soft light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She was lying on something that felt like a bed, but it was made of the same flowing material as the walls. Katie sat up slowly, her head feeling dizzy. She remembered being in the field near her home, and then the strange gray creatures with their big dark eyes. She remembered being carried onto their ship, but everything after that was fuzzy. The room she was in was small, but not uncomfortable. There was no door that she could see, just smooth walls that curved around her. She could hear sounds from somewhere else in the ship, strange musical tones that might have been the aliens talking to each other. Katie was scared, but she was also angry. These creatures had taken her away from her parents without asking. They had made her fall asleep against her will. Her father had taught her that it was wrong to take things that did not belong to you. And Katie belonged with her family, Doc. She stood up and walked to one of the walls. When she touched it, it felt warm and seemed to pulse gently under her fingers. She pushed against it, but it did not move. "Hello?" She called out. "I want to go home now." The musical sounds from outside stopped for a moment, then started again. Katie heard footsteps, or something like footsteps, coming toward her room. A section of the wall opened, and one of the gray creatures appeared. It was not the leader who had found her in the field, but one of the others. It looked at her with those big dark eyes and made some of the musical sounds. Katie stared back at it. "I don't understand you," she said. "I want to go home to my mommy and daddy." The creature tilted its head and made different sounds, gentler ones. It seemed to be trying to communicate with her, but Katie could not understand any of it. On the bridge of the Nexus Prime, Science Commander Veltar was studying the data they had collected from the human child. The readings were interesting and unexpected. The child's brain activity was far more complex than they had anticipated. Most species they studied became docile and quiet after the collection process, but this human child remained alert and defiant. Veltar had been leading research missions for the Zephyrian Science Council for over 30 years. They had studied hundreds of species from across the galaxy, collecting specimens for their vast databases of biological information. Most civilizations never even noticed when a few of their members went missing. The Zephyrians were careful to take only isolated individuals who would not be missed. But something felt different about this collection. The quantum trail they had left behind was stronger than usual, and their long-range sensors were detecting unusual activity in the system they had just left. Ships were moving toward the planet where they had found the human child. "Commander," one of his assistants reported, "we are receiving multiple communication signals from the human settlement. They appear to be broadcasting on all frequencies." Veltar listened to some of the transmissions. Most were in human languages he did not understand, but the translation software was able to process some of them. The humans were calling for help, organizing search parties, and making threats against whoever had taken their child. This was unusual. Most species accepted the loss of individuals as part of life in a dangerous galaxy. But these humans seemed to be treating the loss of one child as an act of war. "Increase our speed," Veltar ordered, "and monitor human communications. I want to know what they are planning." Back on New Eden, Jake Brooks had finished his modifications to the Wanderer. The ship now had upgraded engines and better navigation systems. It was still no match for a military vessel, but it could travel faster and farther than before. Maria had been monitoring radio communications from across human space. The news about Katie was spreading quickly, and the response was unlike anything she had ever seen. Military ships were moving from every direction toward New Eden. Civilian ships were volunteering to join the search. Even merchant vessels were offering to help track down the aliens who had taken a human child. "Jake," Maria said, excitement in her voice, "you need to hear this." She played a message that had just come in from Admiral Price herself. The Admiral was authorizing civilian volunteers to join the search and rescue mission. Any ship that could. Travel in space was welcome to help look for Katie Brooks. Jake felt a surge of hope. His daughter was out there somewhere, probably scared and wanting to come home. But she was not alone anymore. Humanity was coming for her, and they would not stop until she was safe. He started the engines of the Wanderer and felt them respond with more power than ever before. Maria strapped herself into the co-pilot seat and began running through the navigation systems. "Ready?" Jake asked. "Ready," Maria replied. "Let's go get our daughter." The Wanderer lifted off from New Eden and accelerated toward the stars, following the quantum trail left by the alien ship. Behind them, the lights of their colony grew smaller and smaller. Ahead of them, somewhere in the vast darkness of space, Captain Luke Morrison stood on the bridge of the Vengeance, staring at the star map displayed on the main screen. His ship had reached New Eden 2 days ago, and his science team had been working around the clock to analyze the quantum trail left by the alien vessel. "Captain," Lieutenant Davis called from the sensor station, "we have a clear trail heading toward the Centauri sector. The aliens are moving fast, but we can follow them." Morrison nodded grimly. The quantum signature was like fingerprints in space. Every ship left a unique trail when it jumped to faster-than-light speed, and the Zephyrian technology created a particularly strong signature. His science officer, Dr. Corin White, had explained that they could track the aliens across multiple star systems if they moved quickly enough. "How many ships do we have now?" Morrison asked. 47 and counting, sir. Admiral Price's task force will be here tomorrow, and civilian volunteers are still arriving." Morrison had never seen anything like it. Ships from across human space were converging on New Eden. Military destroyers, cargo haulers, passenger transports, and private yachts were all joining the search for one 8-year-old girl. The response was so massive that Morrison had to set up a traffic control system just to keep the ships from crashing into each other. Jake Brooks brought the Wanderer alongside the Vengeance and requested permission to dock. Morrison had heard about the girl's father and his modified transport ship. He agreed to meet with the man who had refused to wait for the military to handle the situation, not Jake and Maria. Brooks came aboard the military vessel, still wearing their work clothes from the farm. Morrison could see the determination in their eyes mixed with fear and exhaustion. These were parents who had not slept properly since their daughter disappeared. "Captain Morrison," Jake said, shaking the officer's hand, "thank you for letting us join the search. Mr. Brooks, I have to be honest with you. This could be dangerous. We don't know what kind of weapons these aliens have, or how they'll react when we catch up to them." Jake's expression did not change. "Captain, they took my little girl. I'm going after her whether you help me or not. I'd rather do it with the military backing me up, but I'll do it alone if I have to." Morrison studied the man's face and saw something that reminded him of his own feelings about his daughter. He made a decision that would have surprised his superiors. "All right, Mr. Brooks, you can stay with the fleet. But you follow my orders, and you don't do anything that puts other ships at risk. Agreed?" "Agreed," Jake said without hesitation. The combined fleet left New Eden that same day, following the quantum trail toward unknown space. Morrison's ship took the lead, with Jake's modified transport staying close behind. The other vessels spread out in a search formation that covered hundreds of thousands of miles. Meanwhile, aboard the Nexus Prime, Katie Brooks was becoming a problem that Science Commander Veltar had never encountered before. The human child refused to remain passive. Like other specimens they had collected, she asked constant questions, explored every inch of her containment area, and had somehow learned to understand basic Zephyrian words. "What is this place?" Katie asked the research assistant who brought her food. She had figured out that the musical sounds the aliens made were actually words, and she was learning to recognize some of them. The young Zephyrian, whose name was something like Zixtal, looked uncomfortable. Most specimens they collected never tried to communicate. They usually became quiet and withdrawn after the collection process. But this human child seemed to get more curious and talkative every day. "This is a research vessel," Zixtal answered, using the simple words he had learned from the human language database. "Why did you take me?" Katie asked. "My mommy and daddy are worried about me." Zixtal did not know how to answer that question. He had never thought about the families of the specimens they collected. The Science Council thought that they were advancing knowledge and understanding of life in the galaxy. They did not usually consider the emotional impact of their research. "We study different life forms," he said finally, "to learn and understand." Katie stared at him with her bright human eyes. "But I'm not a thing to study. I'm a person. I have a family and friends and a home." These words made Zixtal feel something he had never experienced before. It was an uncomfortable feeling, like something was wrong with what they were doing. He quickly left Katie's containment area and reported the conversation to Science Commander Veltar. Veltar was becoming increasingly concerned about the human response to their collection mission. His communications officer was intercepting more and more human transmissions, and the content was alarming. The humans were not sending a small search party or diplomatic mission. They were mobilizing what appeared to be their entire military force. "Commander," the communications officer reported, "we are detecting over 50 human vessels following our trail. Their fleet appears to be growing larger every few hours." This was unprecedented in Veltar-S experience. The Zephyrians had been collecting specimens from various species for centuries. Some civilizations sent small groups to investigate disappearances, but they usually gave up after a few days when the trail went cold. No species had ever responded with this level of force and determination. "Are they harmed?" Veltar asked. "Yes, Commander. We have identified several military destroyers and what appears to be heavy cruisers joining the search fleet." Veltar felt something that Zephyrians rarely experienced: fear. His people were scientists and researchers, not warriors. The Nexus Prime had defensive systems, but it was not built for combat against a large military force. The chase continued for 3 more days. The human fleet followed the quantum trail through 4 different star systems, growing larger as more ships joined from nearby colonies. Morrison's communications officer was now coordinating with over 80 vessels, including 2 heavy cruisers that had diverted from patrol duties to join the search. Admiral Susan Price arrived with her flagship, the Intrepid, and took command of the operation. She met with Morrison and the Brooks family to review their progress. "How close are we?" Admiral Price asked. Dr. White answered from the science station. "The trail is getting stronger, Admiral. We're maybe 6 hours behind them now. They're heading toward the edge of known space, but they can't maintain this speed much longer without stopping to recharge their engines." Admiral Price studied the star charts. The aliens were running toward empty space, far from any known settlements or space lanes. If they were planning to make a stand, they had chosen a good place for it. "Mr. Brooks," she said, turning to Jake, "I want you to know that we're going to get your daughter back. But when we catch up to these aliens, I need you to let us handle the situation. This could turn into a combat situation very quickly." Jake nodded, but Admiral Price could see in his eyes that he would do whatever it took to save Katie. Regardless of orders back on the Nexus Prime, Katie had made an unexpected discovery. While exploring her containment area, she had found that one of the wall panels could be moved slightly. Behind it, she could see into another part of the ship where the aliens kept other specimens. What she saw made her angry and sad at the same time. There were creatures from many different worlds. locked in containers similar to hers. Some looked scared, others seemed sick, and a few appeared to have given up hope entirely. Katie realized that she was not the only one who had been taken from her family. These aliens had been stealing people and creatures from across the galaxy. Probably for a long time. She started talking to the other prisoners, using hand signals and simple words when they could not understand her language. Slowly, she began to organize them, teaching them to work together and share information about their captors. The young Zephyrian, Zix Tao, noticed the change in the specimen's behavior. They were becoming more active and seemed to be communicating with each other. This was highly unusual and potentially dangerous. When he reported this to Science Commander Veltar, the commander realized they had a serious problem. Not only were the humans pursuing them with unprecedented determination, but their primary specimen was somehow influencing the other collected creatures. "Commander," the navigation officer announced, "long-range sensors are detecting the human fleet. They will be within weapons range in approximately 4 hours." Veltar looked at the tactical display showing over 90 human ships approaching their position. The fleet included military vessels that could easily destroy the Nexus Prime in a direct confrontation. For the first time in his long career, Science Commander Veltar began to understand that the Zephyrians might have made a terrible mistake. They had taken a human child, thinking it would be just another specimen for their research. Instead, they had provoked an entire species to war. The Nexus Prime continued fleeing toward the edge of known space, but Veltar knew they could not run forever. Soon, they would have to face the consequences of taking Katie Brooks away from her family. Behind them, the human fleet pressed forward, led by parents who would not stop until their daughter was safe, and backed by a species that had just learned what it meant to threaten their young. The Zephyrian High Council chamber had not seen such urgency in over 300 years. Council members from across their territory connected through quantum communication links, their pale forms shimmering on holographic displays around the circular room. High Counselor Dexfer called the emergency session to order with a series of harmonic tones that conveyed deep concern. The reports coming from Science Commander Veltar aboard the Nexus Prime were unlike anything in their recorded history. "Fellow counselors," Dexfer began, "we face a situation that threatens our very understanding of how civilized species behave. The humans have mobilized over 100 ships to pursue a single research specimen. This response exceeds all our models of rational behavior." Counselor Mervin, the eldest member of the council, spoke from her chamber on the far side of Zephyrian space. "In 7 centuries of specimen collection, no species has ever reacted with such overwhelming force. Most civilizations accept the loss of isolated individuals as unavoidable in a dangerous galaxy." A council reviewed the data streaming in from their observation posts. Human ships were gathering from every corner of their territory. Military vessels, civilian transports, cargo haulers, and even mining ships had joined what appeared to be the largest mobilization in human history. "The tactical analysis is troubling," reported military advisor Kexalon. "The human fleet now includes heavy battlecruisers and enough firepower to sterilize a planet. They are not coming to negotiate. They are coming to wage war." High Counselor Dexfer felt a sensation that Zephyrians rarely experienced: genuine fear. Their people had built their civilization on scientific progress and logical thinking. They had never encountered a species that would risk total war over a single individual. Meanwhile, aboard the Nexus Prime, Katie Brooks had achieved something that should have been impossible. She had united the various captive creatures and organized resistance against their captors. Using hand signals, simple drawings, and the few alien words she had learned, Katie had taught the other prisoners to work together. There was a blue-skinned creature from the Rigel system who could manipulate electronic locks, a furry being from the Outer Rim who had incredible strength, and several others who each contributed unique abilities. "Tonight, when the big one brings food," Katie whispered to her fellow captives, "we do what I showed you." The creatures nodded or made sounds of agreement. Katie had become their leader through her determination and refusal to give up hope. While older, more experienced beings had accepted their fate, this human child had shown them that escape was possible. Young Zixtal was troubled as he made his rounds to feed the specimens. Over the past few days, he had begun to see them differently. Katie's questions about families and homes had made him think about things he had never considered before. When he opened Katie's containment area, she looked at him with her bright eyes and asked, "Do you have a family, Zixtal?" The question surprised him. No specimen had ever asked about his personal life before. "I have birth parents and study partners," he answered carefully. "Would they be sad if someone took you away from them?" Katie asked. Zixtal paused, the food container still in his hands. He had never thought about his collection work from this perspective. "Perhaps," he admitted. "Then why do you take us away from our families?" Katie asked softly. The young Zephyrian had no good answer for that question. He finished his duties quickly and left, but Katie's words stayed with him. Bridge of the Nexus Prime, Science Commander Veltar received another urgent message from the High Council. The human fleet was now less than 2 hours away, and their intentions were becoming clear through intercepted communications. Admiral Susan Price had sent an open broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Admiral Price of the Terran Defense Force. We demand the immediate return of Katie Brooks, age 8, human female, taken from New Eden Colony. You have one opportunity to comply peacefully. Return the child, and we will consider negotiations. Refuse, and face the consequences." Veltar had studied human psychology, but he had clearly underestimated their emotional bonds. The idea that an entire species would risk war for one young individual challenged everything the Zephyrians believed about rational behavior. Science. "Commander," his tactical officer reported, "the human fleet has taken attack formation. We count 112 vessels, including 5 heavy battle cruisers." Veltar looked at the displays showing the approaching human armada. His ship was alone, far from any Zephyrian support, facing a force that could destroy him 100 times over. Aboard the Intrepid, Admiral Price stood with Jake and Maria Brooks as they watched the alien ship appear on their screens. It was larger than they had expected, sleek and silver, like the reports from New Eden had described. "There she is," Jake said quietly, staring at the ship that held his daughter. "Katie's in there." Maria gripped her husband's hand tightly. After days of chasing across the galaxy, they were finally close to their little girl. "Admiral, Captain," Morrison reported from the Vengeance, "we have the alien ship surrounded. They cannot escape." Admiral Price opened a communication channel to the alien vessel. "This is your final warning. Return Katie Brooks immediately, or we will take her by force." Inside the Nexus Prime, Science Commander Veltar faced the most difficult decision of his long career. He could fight, knowing that his ship would be destroyed in minutes. He could try to run, but the human ships were faster and more numerous. Or he could do something that no Zephyrian commander had ever done before. Surrender got, he thought about the young human who had been asking questions that challenged everything he believed about his work. He thought about the other specimens who had become more active and hopeful since her arrival. He thought about the possibility that the Zephyrians had been wrong about so many things. "Open a communication channel to the human fleet," Veltar ordered. The bridge crew looked at him in surprise, but they followed his orders. "This is Science Commander Veltar of the research vessel Nexus Prime," he transmitted. We wish to discuss terms for the return of your young one." Admiral Price's response was immediate and sharp. There are no terms to discuss. Return Katie Brooks now, unharmed, or we will take her. Veltar hesitated. In that moment of silence, something unexpected happened. Young Zixtel entered the bridge, his movements quick and nervous. "Commander," Zixtel said, "I must speak." "This is not the time," Veltar replied, but Zixtel continued. "Commander, I have been observing the human specimen. She has taught me to see our work differently. We take beings from their families, from their homes, from everything they love. We cause suffering for the advancement of knowledge. Is this truly the path of wisdom?" The bridge fell silent. No junior researcher had ever questioned the fundamental mission of the Science Council. Veltar looked at his young subordinate and saw something he recognized: doubt about their methods, the same doubt that had been growing in his own mind since they had taken the human child. On the Intrepid, the humans waited for a response. Jake Brooks watched the alien ship on the screen, knowing that every second his daughter spent aboard that vessel was too long. "Admiral," he said, "let me talk to them." Admiral Price looked at him with surprise. "Mr. Brooks, this is a military operation now. That's my little girl on that ship," Jake said firmly. "Let me try to reach them as a father, not as a soldier." "Admiral." Price considered this request. Sometimes, she thought, a parent's voice could accomplish what military threats could not. "All right, Mr. Brooks, but keep it brief." Jake activated the communication system. "This is Jake Brooks. I'm Katie's father. You took my daughter from her home, from her family, from people who love her more than life itself. I don't know if your species has children, but if you do, you must understand what it means to lose one. Please, just give her back to us. That's all we want." His voice carried across space to the Nexus Prime, where Veltar listened to the pain and love in the Kansai. Human father's words. Science Commander Veltar made his decision. "We will return your child," he transmitted. "But I request safe passage for my vessel and crew. We wish to end this peacefully." Admiral Price looked at Jake, who nodded gratefully. "Agreed," Admiral Price responded. "Transfer Katie Brooks to our ship, and you may leave unharmed." 30 minutes later, a small shuttle left the Nexus Prime and approached the Intrepid. Jake and Maria Brooks waited in the shuttle bay, their hearts pounding with anticipation and hope. The alien shuttle landed, and its door opened. Katie Brooks ran out, healthy and unharmed, straight into her parents' arms. The reunion was broadcast across human space, and the cheers could be heard on ships throughout the fleet. But this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something much larger. Katie Brooks sat in the medical bay of the Intrepid, swinging her legs from the examination table, while Dr. Helen Ward checked her over one final time. Her parents stood nearby, unable to stop smiling despite their exhaustion. After 5 days of fear and uncertainty, their daughter was finally safe. "She's perfectly healthy," Dr. Ward announced. "Whatever the aliens did to sedate her initially, there are no lasting effects. She's a remarkable little girl." Katie looked up at the doctor with bright eyes. "Dr. Ward, there are other people on that ship who need help too. Lots of them from different planets. They've been there much longer than me." Admiral Price, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "What do you mean, Katie?" "The aliens have been taking people from all over the galaxy," Katie explained. "There's a blue lady who's been there for months, and a furry creature who can't even remember his home planet anymore. They're all scared and want to go home, just like I did." Admiral Price felt a cold anger settle in her stomach. The scope of what the aliens had been doing was becoming clear, and it was far worse than just taking one human child. She immediately called Science Commander Veltar aboard the Nexus Prime. "Commander, we need to discuss the other specimens." "You're holding." There was a long pause before Veltar responded. Admiral, what the young human has told you is accurate. We have been conducting research on various species for many years. The Nexus Prime currently holds 47 specimens from 23 different worlds. You mean prisoners? Admiral Price said sharply. You have been kidnapping people across the galaxy. We never considered it in those terms, Veltar admitted. We believed we were advancing scientific knowledge. But recent events have caused us to question our methods. Admiral Price looked at Katie, who was listening intently to the conversation. This 8-year-old child had somehow opened the eyes of an entire alien civilization to the wrongness of their actions. Commander Veltar, here's what's going to happen. You're going to transfer all of your prisoners to our ships. Then you're going to provide us with the locations of every research facility your people operate, and data on every person you've ever taken. Admiral, that information is classified by the Zephyrian Science Council. I do not have the authority to. Then get the authority, Admiral Price interrupted. Because if you don't, this fleet is going to visit every Zephyrian world until we find what we're looking for. And we won't be asking politely. Science Commander Veltar understood the threat. The human fleet surrounding his ship was just a small fraction of their total military capacity. If humanity decided to wage war against the Zephyrians, his people would not survive. He opened a communication channel to the High Council. Honored counselors, I am requesting emergency authorization to release all research data and facility locations to the human fleet. High Counselor Thexver's response was immediate. That is impossible, Science Commander. Such information would compromise centuries of research. Honored Counselor, Veltar replied. With respect, I believe our entire civilization is at risk. The humans have shown they will go to any length to recover their people. If we do not cooperate, they will destroy us. The debate among the High Council was brief but intense. The tactical reports were clear. Humanity had the military strength to carry out their threats. The Zephyrians were scientists, not warriors. They could not win a war against a species that had mobilized over 100 ships for one child. Within 2 hours, Veltar received the authorization he needed. The Nexus Prime began transferring its prisoners to human ships, and detailed information about Zephyrian research operations flowed across secure channels to Admiral Price's intelligence. HFY Stories Dr. Helen Ward worked with the alien prisoners as they came aboard human vessels. Each being had a story of loss and fear, families that missed them, homes they longed to see again. Katie Brooks had been right. The scope of the Zephyrian operation was vast and cruel. Admiral, Dr. Ward reported, we have species here from across the galaxy. Some have been held for years. We're going to need help from multiple governments to get them all home. Admiral Price nodded grimly. Send messages to every known civilization. Tell them what we've found and ask for help in returning these people to their families. Jake Brooks stood on the observation deck of the Intrepid, watching as the last of the alien prisoners was transferred to safety. His daughter sat beside him, drawing pictures of the creatures she had befriended during her captivity. Daddy, Katie said, I want to make sure they all get home safe. Jake smiled and put his arm around his daughter. I think that's exactly what's going to happen, sweetheart. The response from the galaxy was swift and overwhelming. When other civilizations learned about the Zephyrian research program, they sent ships to help with the rescue operations. Many species discovered that missing members of their populations had been taken by the Zephyrians over the centuries. The liberation of the research facilities became the largest joint operation in galactic history. Ships from dozens of different worlds worked together to shut down Zephyrian collection centers and free thousands of prisoners. Science Commander Veltar, meanwhile, was undergoing his own transformation. Young Zixtel had approached him with a proposal that would have been unthinkable just days before. Commander, Zixtel said, I wish to dedicate my research to understanding the emotional bonds between beings and their families. The human child taught me that there is wisdom in love and connection that we have ignored. Veltar looked at his former student with something approaching respect. That is a worthy area of study, Zixtal. Perhaps it is time the Zephyrians learn to value feelings as much as facts. The Zephyrian High Council, faced with universal condemnation and the threat of human military action, announced comprehensive reforms to their research programs. All specimen collection would end immediately, and their scientists would focus on voluntary cooperation with other species rather than forced study. But the changes went deeper than policy. The encounter with humanity had shaken the fundamental beliefs of Zephyrian society. They began to question whether their pursuit of knowledge justified the pain they had caused. 6 months later, Katie Brooks was back home on New Eden, playing in the same fields where she had been taken. But now those fields were protected by a Terran Defense Force monitoring station, and ships from a dozen different species regularly visited the colony. Katie had become something of a celebrity across the galaxy. The little girl who had united alien prisoners and changed the course of interstellar relations was invited to speak at diplomatic conferences and cultural exchanges. "I just wanted to go home," she would tell audiences. "And I realized that everyone else wanted to go home too. It doesn't matter what planet you're from or what you look like. Everyone loves their family." Jake Brooks had become a symbol of parental determination. His modified transport ship, the Wanderer, was displayed in the Galactic Museum of Heroism. But Jake preferred to stay on his farm, growing food and raising his daughter in peace. Maria Brooks used her experience to establish the Galactic Missing Persons Network, a communication system that helped families search for lost loved ones across the galaxy. Her work prevented countless tragedies and helped reunite families that had been separated by various forms of exploitation. Admiral Susan Price was promoted to head the new Interspecies Protection Force, a military organization dedicated to preventing the kind of abuse that the Zephyrians had practiced. Her first official act was to establish protocols ensuring that no species could conduct research on unwilling subjects from other worlds. The Zephyrians, humbled by their encounter with humanity, became advocates for ethical research practices. Science Commander Veltar, now promoted to Cultural Relations Officer, worked to establish new guidelines for scientific cooperation between species. Young Zixtal founded the Institute for Emotional Intelligence, where Zephyrian researchers studied the bonds between beings and their families. His work, inspired by Katie Brooks' questions, led to breakthroughs in understanding consciousness and connection across species. The galaxy had learned an important lesson: never underestimate the power of love, especially when it comes to protecting children. Humanity's response to Katie's abduction had shown that some bonds are so strong that entire civilizations will mobilize to preserve them. Years later, when diplomats gathered to sign the Universal Declaration of Sentient Rights, Katie Brooks was invited to speak at the ceremony. Now a teenager, she stood before representatives from hundreds of worlds and delivered a simple message. "Every being deserves to be with their family," she said. "Every child deserves to grow up at home, surrounded by people who love them. That's not asking for much, but it's worth fighting for." The declaration was signed unanimously, and Katie Brooks' words became the foundation for a new era of interspecies cooperation based on respect and understanding rather than exploitation. On New Eden, in the fields where a little girl had once been taken by aliens, children from many different worlds now played together, under the protection of a galaxy that had learned to value every single life.